Good evening, everybody. We're carrying on now with chapter 11, Nikius, cleanliness. Be'ezrat Hashem, we should finish up tonight. It's one of the longest chapters, if not the longest chapter, I think, in Mesilas Yesharim. And we're talking about the subject of kavod, status seeking, celebrity, fame. Fame, I want to live forever, right? Remember there was a movie about that. The thing about the seeking of kavod, of honor, is unlike any other taiva, any other desire. Kavod is something which is perceived as something spiritual. Other desires are centered around the physical, without going into details. But the desire, the lust for kavod, the desire for status, is something which is, if one can call it, spiritual. Spiritual, I don't mean spiritual in the sense of being uplifted. I mean, it's something which is non-physical. It's a pleasure which is non-physical. And therefore, even when the other desires of a person, as a person gets older, his desire for food becomes less intense. The older a person gets, the less his physical nags at him. But the desire for kavod, the desire for honor, never leaves a person. It never abates. And because of that, it's something which is very dangerous, because a person can think, when he gets older, that he's managed to dominate his physical desires, but the desire for kavod is perpetual, pernicious, insidious, and requires constant supervision. There's a story about the Chofetz Chaim, which I think you told me I didn't tell last week, but if I did, okay, so forgive me. About the Chofetz Chaim. I don't know if it's a true story, but it's, I think, the mashal, the idea, the nimshal at least, is true. Even if it didn't actually happen, that the Chofetz Chaim went into his wife's into the kitchen on Friday afternoon, and he wants to try a bit of the kugel. So, of course, I know there's a mitzvah to taste the Shabbos food, but his wife said, "No, you leave the kugel alone. The kugel is for Shabbos." Kavod, and we're going to see the only true kavod that can be is kavod Torah, is something which a person only can experience in a legitimate way, b'olam haba. It's not something that a human being should seek in this world, unless, of course, as we're going to see, you should never seek it, but I'm saying the only real kavod anyway is Torah. There's really two parts to it. There's no real kavod. All other kavod, all other celebrity is totally empty anyway. But the real kavod which is Torah, and that's something, the reward for that is essentially in Olam Haba. Anyway, let's start. Klal shel davar. Hakavod hu hadoichech es leva adam yosem mekol hatashukos. Honor is the thing that pushes, that instigates, that motivates a person. Status, celebrity. More than anything else, all the other desires. And as I said before, it's something which never fades, because it's not something which is physical. If it was physical, so the less physical a person becomes, the less enthralled to his physical desires, so then that wanes. But because it's something spiritual, it never slackens, it never lessens. So, if it was not for that, for the desire of this world, if it was not for a desire for a person's honor, so Uleza Adam Misratzev Le'echol Mashiyuchol, a person would be happy to eat what came to hand to eat, to dress in clothes which would cover his nakedness, and to dwell in a house she tastireu min ha-pagoim, which will protect him from the elements. V'yasa panosoi kala, he would seek an easy job, V'lo haya tzarich lis yageya, and he wouldn't need to tire himself life lahashia, to make himself wealthy at all. Why is he doing all this? Ela she levilti ro'is atzmo shofel v'pochus mereov machnis atzmo ba'oni hakoira hazos ve'ein kates l'chol amaloi. Were it not for his, it's the feeling that he cannot bear to see himself less than anybody else. So he's prepared to push himself into a very difficult lifestyle where he's constantly seeking to be richer, to be more famous, to be on top of everybody else. If it were not for this, a person would be happy enough just to have a parnasa, simple parnasa, provided he can eat reasonably and wear clothes that keep him warm and live in a house, a comfortable house, and have a car that doesn't break down. I mean, the definition, let's face it, of a good car is one that gets you to A to B safely and quietly, and doesn't take you time out of every month to drive it to the shop to get it fixed up. Really, a person's needs can be satisfied with much, much less than a person thinks that he needs. And the reason why he thinks he needs these things very often is because he can't bear to feel less than keeping up with the Joneses. The grass is greener. There's a nice story I once heard from my Rabbi about this guy, this fisherman, and he's sitting on the beach, and he's got this fishing line, and he's fishing, and he catches some fish, and he cooks the fish on a fire. And this rich guy sees him, and he comes down, and he sits next to him, and he said, "You know something?" He said, this fisherman, this simple fisherman says, "Yeah." He says, "What?" He said, "You know something? What you could do why don't you invest in getting a small boat? Then you could go out to sea and you could catch some more fish, much more fish than you're catching just with a line on the beach." And so he said, "Okay, and so what?" Well, he said, "Well, then once you've got a boat and you're starting to make money because you're catching more fish, you could buy an even bigger boat." And he said, "And then what?" He said, "Well, business will start to pick up because you'll have a bigger boat, you'll be having a bigger catch, you'll be able to sell more, you're making more profits, and then you can buy another boat." And he said, "And then what?" "And then you can buy a third boat." And he said, "Eventually what? You'll be able to have, like a fleet of fishing boats, you'll be extremely rich." And he said, "And then what?" "Well," he said, "then you can take it easy." He said, "Well, I'm already doing that now." A person tends to think that if he is successful, that he'll bring him something that he doesn't already have. It's an illusion. Arcane, that's why, if it were not for all of these things, the desire not to see oneself less than anybody else, a person would be content with those things which sufficed his needs. Arcane, Rabbeinu Zichron L'Rocha. So Chazal say in our voice, Kina v'hataiva hakovod motzin es ha'odam min ha'olam. Kina, jealousy. Taiva, lust, desire for physical pleasures, and kavod, and the desire for status, which, as we said, is a kind of desire, but it's a quote-unquote spiritual desire. They remove a person from the world. V'hisuru, and Chazal warn us about that also in Avos. Al tevakesh gedula va'al tach moid kavod. Do not seek greatness, and do not desire honor. And why is that? Because a person can literally take himself out of the world. He can remove himself from the true pleasures of this world because he's so eaten up. We've spoken in previous weeks about jealousy. As we spoke about before, kina really is a total misapprehension, a misunderstanding of the world as it is, that God puts each of us on our own individual monorail. What's for me is for me, and what's for you is for you. Kina is a lack of understanding of the world, a lack of trust in Hashem. Taiva is something which a person surrenders to the lower part of himself. It's a lack of his tzuras ha'odam. I'm talking about physical desires. I once heard actually, that if you think about it, the three cardinal sins are parallel to the three relationships that a person has. The three cardinal sins are shvichas damim, murder, gilui arayas, sexual immorality, and Avodah Zarah, idol worship. And they parallel the three relationships that a person has in this world. A person has three forms of relationship, three kinds. There's a relationship a person has with Hashem, which is ben Adam lamokom, which the antithesis of this is Avodah Zarah. Idol worship basically is the negation of his relationship with Hashem. The negation of the relationship with my fellow, ben Adam lachavero, clearly the worst part of when it sinks to its absolute nadir, that's murder. That's the ultimate negation of my relationship with my fellow man, is to kill somebody, God forbid. And the relationship, the opposite, the negation of the relationship which I have, my third relationship, which is with myself, is immorality. Arguably, sexual immorality in many circumstances doesn't hurt anybody else. There are relationships with the Torah says which are osa, which may not cause pain to anybody else or anybody. And theoretically, were it not for the fact that God says that it's osa, but it's not really a breakdown in my relationship with God. I can still believe in Hashem. I can still, the thing is that it's a breakdown of the relationship between me and myself. It's it's a diminution of the tzuras ha'adam. It's a dimming of the humanity of a person. When a person becomes involved in immorality, he becomes more of a beast and less of an angel. The tzuras ha'adam, as the Navi says, I've placed holchim, walkers amongst the omdim kan. Pasuk, I think, is in Yeshaya, that Hashem placed walkers. We are the walkers. Man has the ability to become more angelic, higher, or he can go the other direction. He can become more of an animal. He's composed of both. Man is this unique shiluv, synthesis of the spiritual and the physical. And our job is to make ourselves more spiritual. Sexual immorality, as we said, may not in any way harm somebody else. And in abstract form, it may not, except for the fact that, of course, it's also may not harm my relationship with Hashem. What it does is it harms my relationship with myself. Kina, which is between me and somebody else. Taiva, which has been me and myself. And covered, they take a person out of this world. They remove a person from his true understanding of what it is to be a human being. V'yizru the Shaman says, Al tavakesh gedula, don't seek for greatness, and do not seek lust, desire, honor. Kamaheim hamis anim barav yashpila etzmat tzmam leis parnes ben tzedakah v'lo yisasku b'melocha shelo tiyeh mechubedes b'eineihem mir yosam pen yimat kavodam. How many people are prepared to finance themselves from tzedakah, to take money from the community or from individuals, rather than going out and taking a job which in their eyes we can be considered to be demeaning? Is there any greater stupidity, says Mrs. Yesharim, than that? And v'yoser, because more than that, they prefer to dwell in batala, in idleness. And as we know, batala leads to boredom, and boredom leads to immorality and to hate of all kinds, to theft, and all kinds of other major sins. Rather than humble themselves and go and get a job which they consider to be beneath their dignity, beneath this imaginary dignity that they have. Chazal have always said, Asher hor'unu v'hidrichunu tomid b'darkei ames. They constantly steer us in the way of truth. Omru, they said in Avos, ehov es hamalacha v'sana es harabanus. Love the work and hate. Now, in this context, Rabbanut really it means like status. Love the work and hate to be part of the status, to have status. Don't worry about your status. Don't worry about other people are thinking about you, because it'll take you to the position where you're prepared to finance yourself on tzedakah, and this leads to all these very bad things. It says in Pesachim Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Pshot nevelosa b'shuka v'lo teima gavra rabba ana kahana ana. A person should flay carcasses in the shuk, in the marketplace, a lowly profession, rather than say, I am a great person. I'm sorry, not for me. I am a priest. It's not for me. It's all illusionary, and it leads to great aveirus. V'amru oid, it says in Bafek Basra, Lo'olam ya'avoid odam avoida shehi zora, loy va'al yitztarech lebrios. A person should always, if he has to, do work which is foreign to him, rather than he should require the support of other people. Klal Devarim. Let's sum up now, the general principle. Hakavod hu min ha-machshalois hayose gedolim asher la'odam. Status seeking, honor, celebrity, whatever you want to call it, is one of the greatest stumbling blocks that a person has in his life. And of course, this means because he just cannot, the idea, he says it very clearly, I don't want to feel less than other people. What's less, what's more? It's a total illusion. It's a very important part. A person is in this world to be an Eved Hashem, to serve Hashem. But all the time that he's worried about his own kavod, he cannot be machabed. He can't give Hashem the proper honor. Any kind of honor that he takes for himself does inevitably reduce the kavod of Hashem in this world. And clearly, that's the opposite of what a person is supposed to be doing here. Because Al kol ponim yitztorech leme'et b'kvoid shamayim mipnei sichluso. So he understands why that does. Because when a person is concerned with his own kavod, his foolishness will lead him to be negligent in being mechabed Hashem, in his proper observance of mitzvahs, in his davening, in the way he acts. Zehu ma she'omer David HaMelech olav hashalom, as David HaMelech says, unakaloisi oid, and I became even less. He lowered himself, mizos, than this. V'isi shofel be'inoi, and I was lowly in my eyes. And of course, that's David HaMelech, the king. A king who, of course, has a need to show an outward show of kavod HaMalchus, but inside he has to be that much more humble because of his role is a challenge. And now, as we said before, v'kavod ha'amiti ena ela yedias ha'toras emes. The only honor, the only true honor there really is the knowledge of the Torah of truth. Chazal say in Avos, ein kavod ela Torah. There is no kavod. There is no status. There is no real honor except for Torah. The more a person knows Torah, the more a person exemplifies the Torah. It's not just enough to be a chamor nosei sfarim. It's not just enough to be, as they say, a donkey carrying books. Knowledge in itself is not enough. A person has to know, and he has to know deeply, but he has to take that knowledge and inculcate it. He has to live the Torah. He has to be a walking Sefer Torah. A Talmid Chacham is somebody who has to make sure that his midas are on a par with his knowledge. Otherwise, Chilul Hashem Gadol Mizu. There's no greater Chilul Hashem when you see somebody who I remember Nota Schiller, Sinclair passed away this week, and it's a great tragedy for all of us. And I remember so many of the things that he said, and just reminded me one thing right now when he said that, talking about this idea of when a person's a Fruma Yid, when he has a beard, when he has a couple, when he has tzitzis, when he has, the more religious he looks from the outside, the more religious he has to be on the inside. And the story goes, he used to tell from Nota Zatzal that there was this secular Jew sitting on a train next to a religious Jew, and the secular Jew shows the religious Jew the newspaper, and there's this picture of this religious Jew, and it says, "Arrested for embezzlement." And so the secular Jew says to the religious Jew, says, "Well, what do you say about that?" I remember Rav Nota used to say, he said, "Well, the problem was, under his beard he was unshaven." So, yeah, so a person has to be tocho kabaro. His outside has to be like his inside. And, I remember, I think I said this before, the first time when I was becoming religious in New York City. Did I say this before? I already said this one, okay. But I'm saying, just an incident, I put a couple on my head for the first time, walked out into the street, and I realized I'm now an ambassador for Klal Yisrael and for the Rebbeinu Shalom. I think everybody who's become religious has had this feeling. I guess it's more difficult if you grow up or with a couple on your head, so you don't feel that so much. But certainly I think every Baal Tshuva probably can relate to that idea that as soon as he sort of puts the uniform on, he's, right? Anyway. So the idea is, Ein kavod ela Torah, shene'amar in Mishlei, kavod achomim yinchalu. Kavod. Honor the wise will inherit. V'zulosa, and apart from the Torah, Eino ela kavod medumeh v'choizev. It's nothing more than medumeh, imaginary and false kavod. All of these guys turning up at the Oscar ceremonies, it's all a load of nonsense. It's all empty. There's nothing about them at all which is worthy of honor. Hevel, emptiness, ve'ein boi moil, and it has no use whatsoever. Varui hanoki, again, remember we're coming to the end of the chapter on the kiyus. And the person who wants to be clean, so it's kedai, it's worthwhile that he should cleanse himself and purify himself with a complete purity from this mistaken idea of status and honor. Hine, now it's just finishing off the chapter, he says, behold, kalalti ad heina rabim mipirte and nikirus. I've gathered together here many particulars of specific areas of life, mitzvahs, midos, where a person has to be noki, has to clean himself out completely, whether that be his kashrus or looking after his zrizus, his zehirus, covered all the different aspects of a person's life, whether they be mitzvahs, aseh, mitzvahs, lo aseh, character traits. All of these things require a constant effort to raise oneself up to the level of a noki. And we're going to see B'ezrat Hashem next week how a person does this. But right now he's finishing off. And he said, V'zev binyan av l'kol sha'a mitzvahs. This paradigm that the Yesharim has offered us, going through these various areas that he went through, many of them, but of course that's not the end of the story. This is a paradigm, this chapter should serve as a paradigm for other mitzvahs and other character traits, all of them, and they all require the same degree of attention. And Yishma Chochem v'Yosef Lekach v'Navoin Tachbulas Yikene. So it's the Mishlei, it says the wise man will hear and he will Mosiv Lekach, he will add to this his wisdom, and the man of understanding, Anavon Tachbulas Yikene, he will sort out stratagems and literally tricks, ways that he can fool his Yetzer Hara, ways that he can move ahead and achieve the kiyus. It's a very interesting point he's bringing up now. He says, I can't deny that it's more than a little effort to become a Noki. That's for sure. Lagi ela nekiyas hazeh. But nevertheless, and this is, I think, very important, because I think very often you can read Mesilas Yesharim or any Musa Sefer and feel that it's just completely beyond me. It's just a total, I'm not shaykh to that. It's so untrue. Because even though it's true that it does take work, no doubt about it. Afal Pikain, says the Mesilas Yesharim, Oime ani, I say, and obviously if he said it, it must be that he's in a position to know what he's talking about. She'ein tzorech kol kach kamo shenira lechoira. It doesn't need as much as you might think. In other words, it looks worse than it is. It's like a mountain. You look at a mountain from afar and it seems to be enormous. But if you start walking up the mountain, every ascent of every mountain consists of steps. The steps of a man, 18 inches, whatever it is. One after another, after another. There's no mountain in the world. I mean, I'm not talking about where you're climbing Everest or something where there are ice fields and crevasses and you need... but I'm talking about any mountain that's linear, that just keeps going up and up and up in a way that a person could walk up there with serious oxygen or whatever it is. But theoretically, to preserve the moshel, there's no difference from the first step to the second step, to the third step, to the last step. The difference is if you keep going. He says that if rather than think about it, if you do it, commotion, it's not as difficult as it looks like. L'chayra v'ha machshava b'davar hazeh kosha min hamase. Thinking about it is actually more difficult than the doing. Ki hasher yosim ha'adam b'liboy. Because once a person makes up his mind, v'yikba b'ritzono, and he fixes in his will, b'kvius, in a constant fashion, liyois mibale hamida hatovazos, to be one of the people who have this midah of nekiyos, when he's decided that's what I want to be. Hine b'ma'at hergel, with a little bit of habituation, good habituation obviously, shiyargil atzmo b'zeh, that he habituates, he accustoms himself to this particular mode of behavior. Tashuv lo kala, he will find, he will easily acquire it. Amazing. You'd have thought he's going to say, wow, this is really this is so tough. He say no. It's going to be much easier in practice than in thought, provided you fix your mind on wanting to be like this. It's much easier in the doing than the thinking. Toshuv lo kala harbe yosem mima shahaya yochel achshav, is going to be much easier to become a Noki than he would have thought. Zeh davar, this is something nisayon yochiach amito, which experience proves its truth. And clearly, obviously, if he's telling this, it must be that he himself achieved nekiyos and much more than that. He died before the age of 40. This is Yesharim. Okay, we're going to pause here. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to finish off this first section of the book. He's going to talk about how we acquire this midah of nekiyos. As I said, he's talking about what its aspects are, how important it is, but we haven't actually spoken about how a person does this. That's for next week, Bezrat Hashem. And then after Pesach, I think, we'll see how we go. We're going to move up to the level of precious. Now, up till now, we've been talking about what's called tzidkus. Up to now, the Mesilas Yesharim has been dealing with things which every Jew is expected to be able to do. Everything that's written in the Shulchan Aruch. Once we get to the level of precious, that's already the level of chassidus. That's going beyond the letter of the law. So as we mentioned right at the beginning, it's difficult for me enough to go this far. Why are we starting to learn? Why do there's another half the rest of the book is levels of chassidus? The answer is that, and we said this before and it's worth repeating, The mere fact that a person understands there are these madregas, even if he'll never reach them, will make him a different person. The mere knowledge of the madregas which are above tzidkus, the levels of precious, etc., all the way up to the end of the book. The mere knowledge, the mere understanding of these levels makes a person a higher person. And the second reason we're going to learn it is because even though it's true that a person, most of us, will never reach these levels, but that doesn't mean for at some one point in his life, he may actually be able to rise above his level and touch that midah, which, as I say, will be above where he's, as they say, holding. But he'll be able to reach up and touch something that's a little bit above himself, and that will change his entire life. And so for that reason as well, it's worth learning these madregas, the madregas of Chassidus, which are beyond the letter of the law, beyond tzidkus, beyond what it says that one must do in the Shulchan Aruch. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll finish off next week. B'ezrat Hashem.